Not
This
much. How you
call is
doing?
being recorded.
Uh, just going over some notes. Um, I was wondering, we could start off with the placebo effect. I know we had talked about presenting that,
Right.
and the placebo effect greatly has to do with mind over matter, consciousness, and consciousness expansion. Because somebody can go into a hospital room and have a disease or have some sort of issue that's wrong with them, and there's been cases where a doctor gave them a sugar pill, and within 24 hours or less, they were healed of whatever
Right.
ailment they had.
Right.
And, that's the brain. It looks to me like the sugar pill was the permission slip the brain and the soul of the individual needed to come out of whatever sickness they had.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's because I think when you think about and that's a part of medicine too they don't talk much about is things that are psychosomatic, or
Mm-hmm.
just being, internally generated by the person's anxieties. Um, that's a way of addressing that issue. But what's interesting to me is how much power the mind can actually have over the physical body, where you can be in, excruciating pain, or you can be having heart palpitations, and technically, if they were to test you, there's like nothing wrong with you. Like there's no diabetes, there's no heart disease, nothing wrong with you, but you're having the same symptoms that you might have if you had that actual disease. And it's
But
amazing that the brain is that powerful to do that, but I think it has to do with our autonomic nervous system. That part that it doesn't think, we just automatically breathe, right? If we had to think about breathing, we would be dead. you know,
uh,
and I think that might have something to do with it as well.
definitely. I've been studying international psychiatry lately in the last few years, as well as international psychology as well. And there was a doctor named Toby Watson that I came across who was a professional psychologist. And Toby Watson basically stated the current medical field is a joke. He said it's
Hmm.
only set up to give people drugs. He's a psychologist, but he was talking about psychiatry as well. And he said the whole system's set up to be a drug dealer,
Right.
make you think you need these drugs. And he said there's companies out there who got warehouses full of drugs. This is a real doctor saying this. This isn't a internet researcher. This is a real doctor who deals with patients on a daily basis. And he said there's no evidence for schizophrenia. He said there's no evidence for schizophrenia. He said there's no proof of it. It's a hoax. The whole thing's a joke. And he sat there and explained the whole thing. And I listened to what he said, and I went back. I was looking at the placebo effect. I was looking at are you familiar with the psychologists that were researching ESP? They turned into parapsychologists.
What's
They
their name?
well, the SRI company that was around
I don't
back
think
in the 70s.
I don't think I know about that. No.
They came out of Stanford. They came out of Stanford Research, and they were with SRI company. And basically, this is over in California, but they operate on the East Coast too. And they had, early studies in remote viewing, psychokinesis, pyrokinesis, all of these different mind-blowing capabilities that humans have. And people spent millions of dollars on their research, billions of dollars actually, for these scientists to discover remote viewing, ESP, all the things that we think are meant to be in a comic book. High-level doctors and scientists poured millions of dollars into it back in the 70s.
Hmm.
And remember that movie, The Rain Man,
Yeah.
with Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman, right?
Yes. Yes.
And Rain Man was supposed to be autistic, and Rain Man was supposed to have a mental problem, and Rain Man was a genius.
Right.
Right. There's been experiments done on patients in psychiatric wards where people meant to believe these people had some sort of issue or they were crazy, just like they wanted people to believe Albert Einstein was crazy.
Mhm.
But he's the talk of Princeton. Albert Einstein's always the talk of Princeton University. But they wanted us to
Right.
believe he was crazy at the time. They're finding out these people that they think once had mental issues now might actually have some sort of ability, some sort of paranormal ability or hyper-focused. Maybe paranormal is not the exact terminology, where we can use terminology, but they can hyper-focus into areas that average people can't.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're like that, you can't other people who can't do it view you as odd, because it's a different way of perceiving the world that most people don't do. They
Mm-hmm.
pathologize it and they tell the person there's something wrong with them.
Right. They tell the person there's something wrong with them, and in reality, there may not be anything wrong with the individual. From our standards of saying somebody is wrong. Going back to the placebo effect, I was studying some miraculous work in psychology where an individual might have a split, what you call a fractured personality. They may
Mhm.
have a disease. They switch when their personality switches, the disease no longer exists. There's been people with
Mhm.
HIV. There's been people with HIV and cancer who had multiple personalities. When one personality switches, the disease goes away.
Yeah, I've heard that from I actually knew a girl who claimed she had multiple personalities, and she said she had ones that, like, she had been out drinking, they could, like, drive the car for her and she was totally sober somehow.
Mm.
Um and just all sorts of weird stuff like that. Not that I would recommend anybody try that, but it's weird how, like, what it's suggesting is that your mind can adjust to the environment.
Mm-hmm. Right. Your mind adjusting to the environment. That's interesting. I was looking at I've been researching environmental psychology for a period of time, and
Yeah.
your environment plays a big role into self-identification. You
Mhm.
know, and it's interesting how different people react differently to their environment. It basically deals with brainwaves.
Well, it
You
does,
know.
and it also deals. That's where kind of the DNA comes in because they're always looking at the relationship between gene expression and the environment. Which I think kind of that's what goes back to the placebo effect. Is it's anything you can do to introduce something different into your environment might have a placebo effect. It could actually affect your gene expression. But it's something that's so complex. It's like I don't think they have the ability to study it happening in real time unless
Mm-hmm.
they like literally put a person in like a mouse cage or something and like took measurements, to see if their DNA was changing while they were put through different stresses.
Yeah, to see if their DNA changed based on the stress that they were experiencing. That's deeply interesting right there. That's deeply interesting. I have you ever heard of a book called The Heart's Code?
No, I haven't heard of that book.
This book is miraculous. It's called The Heart's Code, and it's written by a surgeon, right? And he did heart transplants for years, and he interviewed dozens of doctors, all sorts of nurses and stuff, and there's real scientific, practical evidence beyond that. It's beyond. If you read the book, you'll be convinced. Uh, there's been heart transplants done, and the patient, the donor, gave the receiving patient their characteristics, their personality.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
I've heard about that phenomenon. Yeah.
yeah. So say the donor had a preference for Mexican food, the receiver, their preference would change for Mexican food. Even the sexual
Mhm.
preferences would change.
Oh
There was a
wow.
woman who was a donor. She was a prostitute. The receiver woman got the heart, and she took on the sexual desires of the donor.
Oh wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a wonderful book. Um, and going back to what we were saying about extrasensory perception, I've been just sitting back reading this stuff the last few years, and this stuff attracted, even NASA was interested in the
Mhm.
abilities of the mind to connect with different people. What's your view on? You have like a mainstream view on
See,
That's
I
just
don't know because see, I don't. The reason I don't know is because I mean, there's been times in my life where I could say maybe I was somewhat intuitive or like had good timing, but I wouldn't
Mhm.
necessarily like go hang a shingle outside my house and offer people like psychic readings or something like that. But
Mhm.
I feel like our subconscious processes more information than we can consciously, and it does it faster than we can. And so I think there's something to that as well, like the things that we don't know that we know or we don't know that we notice. And so to me, in a sense, the psychic realm or what maybe the researchers were doing is it's almost like a language or a method for accessing what's in the subconscious. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think the subconscious, because the subconscious is still consciousness.
Right.
It might be subconscious, but it's still there though. It's still a part of the individual. And when we go into dream states, we work the subconscious, and I think a lot of the subconscious that we have comes from repression. We repress
Mhm.
things that growing up as children, we've repressed memories, we've repressed events, then we forgot that we repressed them,
Mhm.
and they're still there.
Right.
Almost like you put somebody under hypnosis, they start talking like a child again. All
Yeah.
these.
Yeah. different
Right.
states different states of consciousness basically. And but the other thing too is there's so much information out there that our brain naturally has to ignore some of it, but I feel like it if there's something to it that like for you're saying maybe for that reason, like something that you need to remember but you don't know that you know it, you might
Mhm.
see like clues around you and your brain might record those clues, and then over time they might become meaningful, and pull up what is in your subconscious. But it's I don't know. It's kind of one of those things where you have to ask yourself: do you just go with the flow, and let it kind of evolve naturally, or do you do the things that these people were doing, where you're kind of trying to force it up? Because I think that can be dangerous to an extent. Like I think you can get you might get some information, but you might not be able to interpret it because the big picture isn't there.
Right. Right. Definitely. Definitely. Let me read this small segment.
Okay.
This is on Amazon from the book The Heart's Code. This guy's a PhD, Purcell, that wrote the book, but he said the heart is the primary generator of info energy. The heart is constantly sending out patterns of info energy that regulate organs and cells throughout the body. Every cell in the body is literally bathed in the info energy conducted from and by the heart. Since the heart is a primary generator and transmitter of info energy, it is central to our system's recollection of its life, its cellular memory. And this gets into DNA too. It goes on and it gets into DNA and diseases and all this stuff. And
Mhm.
basically, the primary focus of the book was that the brain doesn't do nearly as much as what the heart does. And they're finding out that the heart outranks the brain like 10-1 in most
Mhm.
cases. You know, and and this kind of gets into the ego mind a little bit, I believe. How in the West we use the ego mind a lot. Coming out of Hinduism. Are you familiar with that?
Mm. Yeah.
You know,
I
like
I was just
like
thinking about I was just thinking about the different physical aspects of it, like with like whatever the brain is doing that keeps us alive, and then the heart is kind of a timing signal. But then they also say that like 90%, or at least 75, maybe 90% of our nervous system is actually in our stomach. So
okay,
when you think about like brain, heart, and stomach, all three working together, it makes sense to me. It seems like it's a feedback system.
right, right, okay, yeah, I can go for that. I haven't heard that before, but I can definitely go for it. In the
Okay.
and the ner- and but the in the nervous system has a lot of memory to it. Like we do. Take exercising for example, or working a punching bag. When you go back into the gym and if you've been lifting weights for a certain amount of time or doing a certain exercise, you don't even have to think about it. The muscle memory just adapts and adjusts to it
Right.
Like somebody who in karate class who's practiced a certain sort of kick, after so long, they don't even have to think about it. They can just do it.
Exactly.
You know, your body adapts to whatever you're doing. You know, and so it's like a good chess player can make an excellent move without even really. Sometimes they don't even think about it. They just do it.
Mm-hmm.
They just jump to
Mm-hmm.
it. Are you?
I
Oh,
was
go
going to
ahead.
say the interesting thing about that is, it's like there's our thoughts and there's our what we live as the experience of, learning those things or training our bodies, but the information, in a way, it is getting converted electrochemically. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's kind of interesting where when people start talking about frequencies or disrupting people's bodies, you are interacting with an electrical system. You
Right.
can do something to somebody and it cause their muscle to twitch, and it's not as a result of them consciously or intentionally moving that muscle, but it can be made to do it on its own.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Definitely. Definitely. Are you familiar with the chakra system?
Yes.
Okay. Now, where do you feel the chakra system comes in at? Do you feel there's a place for the chakra system? You know, dealing with the brain, the body, the heart. All this is all this connected in some way, or?
I guess I would view it as like a map. So,
Mm-hmm.
like if a person is feeling unbalanced, then the chakra system would give them an idea of restoring balance or what balance would look like in each part of the body. And so it would be a way of, to use it would be a way of detecting what's there versus how, you would feel if things were in alignment or if you were healthy in that particular place.
Right. Right. I was okay when it comes to the chakra system. The first chakra, the root chakra, that seems to be the chakra that governs survival, that governs fear, that governs anxiety, that governs doubt. Basically, like a fight or flight chakra. And
Mhm.
to me, that chakra simultaneously resonates with the reptilian center of the brain,
Mhm.
which is the hindbrain.
Right.
An animal like a snake or a crocodile, they're fight or flight. They're in survival mode 24/7 in most cases. You know, I've seen big dangerous snakes play with little kids and not be scared. But in general, we look at the reptile as being a primal species, fight or flight, and the root chakra, to me, corresponds directly with that center of the brain.
Mhm.
And when people raise their consciousness and they start coming out of that, when they start going to the heart chakra or the throat chakra, they get more inclusive in spirituality. Like when you get up to the crown chakra, you're dealing with the pineal gland that deals with dimethyltryptamine.
Right.
And the pineal gland is actually most active between 12 and 3 a.m. That's when people have the most paranormal activity. That's when people have the strangest dreams. That's when everything that's mystical about life happens. Almost like
Mhm.
Abraham Maslow's peak experience. Are you familiar with Abraham Maslow?
Yeah. Yeah, the hierarchy of needs, and you were talking about what do you call the peak experience?
Yeah, the peak experience. Like the peak experience. Most of us have peak
That
experiences
like
throughout our life. And Abraham Maslow was a big speaker back in the 60s. And, he's a psychologist. He described his views on this, and a lot of people have heard of it.
well, one thing I want to interject there that as you were speaking kind of came to my mind is if you were to take more of a less of a euphemistic or sort of analogous approach to the chakra system and more of a objective, like what could be the possible like trauma or attacking of those particular places. There's something about it that sounds like an allegory to me.
Oh,
If
the root
somebody's
chakra?
attacked, yeah, like if somebody's attacked the root chakra or this or that, and you're moving it up to your heart and your throat, it suggests that healing is getting in touch with your feelings and then talking about it. You know what I mean? Like this
you,
chakra.
you know,
The,
right. Like I think financial stability is big. How am I gonna
right.
you know how am I gonna access food? Can I go out and find something to eat, or do I have to buy something to eat, or is somebody trying to harm me? Is somebody a threat? But those things can be accomplished and overcome. I did a video about street gangs in Chicago that had $1 million investors back in the 70s. And these gang members who usually lived in an area where they had rival gang members opposing them on a constant basis, they put that away just so they could go out, clean their community, do the lawn, do the grass, fix the houses. And they had money coming in, though, for them to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't. Just like today in Chicago, there's still certain gangs, a lot of people turn on the news in Chicago and they watch the gangster disciples go out and kill each other, or kill their rivals
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. Now there's people who formerly have been part of this gang who say the GD stands for growth and development.
Yeah.
And now they're running car washes, doing favors for their neighbors. They're not involved in anything nefarious. They're still representing their little organization, but they've moved on to educate themselves and to create a peaceful life within a negative environment.
Do you know what was the catalyst for that? Was it like a couple of people just sort of setting themselves up as leaders and inspiring people, or was it something bigger?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I've just seen some of the individuals come out and say that. There's individuals on YouTube who have, the literature and history of that organization. They're a part of it, and I've heard them come out and say they don't represent violence. They represent growth and development. They represent building their neighborhood. They represent taking care of their children, and they're serious about it too.
Right.
And I'm not sure what sparked that, but that's just what's been happening. It's some sort of trend going on in Chicago where people are putting down guns and picking up jobs. But the news media might not promote that, though.
Right.
The news media might promote the negativity, but there's people out there who rose to the occasion of getting out of that root chakra of survival and fear and stepping up into their heart chakra and elevating their consciousness and moving forward. There's people out there, I've seen some amazing stuff over the years.
What do you think about? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, what did you think about? Actually, I don't think I've talked to you about this. I was going to bring up again some of the DNA stuff too, because I don't know if you've heard of this lady named Henrietta Lacks, but she was famous because of the cell line that she had. She did end up having cancer, but it was, she said, the cells were the source of the HeLa cell line, which they call the first immortalized cell line and one of the most important cell lines in medical research. An immortalized cell line reproduces indefinitely under specific conditions, and the HeLa cell line continues to be a source of invaluable medical data to the present day. Now, some of the stuff I've heard about this is that people with this particular genetic component to themselves have longer telomeres than most people. And the reason that's important is that the telomere, every time you go through transcription, when your cells are renewing themselves, they cut off a piece of that telomere to help with the reproduction of those cells. But the length of your telomeres is directly related to your aging. So the shorter the telomere, the more that you're aging. And there's also some connection to this, I believe, with the research they're doing right now into stem cells also, and what they would call pluripotent stem cells, which have the ability to become anything. Have you looked much into that, like that area of research, or connected it to anything that you've been reading?
After this phone conversation, I'm asking you politely to forward that information to me so I can get more in depth in it. No, I haven't.
Okay.
That's amazing. Can you state the woman's name one more time?
Sure, her name is Henrietta Lacks. Last name Lacks, and she was born August 1st, 1920, and she died. Oh, this is weird. She died on my birthday. Actually, before I was born, she died October 4th, 1951, at the age of 31 years old in Baltimore, Maryland. They've got a
Henrietta Lacks.
monument. Henrietta Lacks, yes. I'll send you the Wikipedia on her. Her occupation, this is interesting. She was a tobacco farmer. There's a monument to her at the Henrietta Lacks Health and Bioscience High School and historical makeover at Clover, Virginia. Well, this is actually I need to keep on reading about her because it gets more and more interesting as it goes.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. See, you're a reader.
Definitely.
That's why I love talking to you, because you're a reader, and as readers, we know we cannot always cover every single, every single area of one topic, let alone all these other topics out there. So, I'm going to definitely read into this for a few weeks, and then we can get back into it at a future date. But that's amazing that she died she passed on your birthday.
It is really strange, and the reason that I feel a connection to her is that I won't go to detail, but I was told by some people that I might like have that same thing going on with me.
Mm.
Um, so it's that's her name is always stuck in my mind, and I've always kind of wanted to. Have you ever done like one of those 23andMe tests? Like I was really tempted to do one of those to find if I could see anything unusual, but then I got kind of freaked out about it because they do sell our data. That's been verified. They were actually selling our data and saying that they weren't doing it, but I've been
Say it one
curious
more
to
time,
take one of those.
please.
23andMe, they were like, they do that ancestry test. They'll tell you like what, ancestors you have, like who you're genetically related to by like, you could be like 5% West African, 10% Jewish, or something like that. And I want to take one of those tests, but I kind of also just don't want to give them my DNA, and I don't know why. I'm probably just being paranoid. But I was just curious if you'd ever had one of those tests done.
No, I haven't, but that's brilliant. I've known people who have went and gotten DNA tests,
Yeah.
and they found out that they were part Jewish, or their family actually came from the Middle East, or there was one woman. I seen a commercial for that Ancestry.com, and it was a woman. She thought she was Italian, and she was really Spanish. Her family actually went back to Spain or something, and
Mhm.
especially for people of European descent, that where their name was changed coming through Ellis Island. Uh,
Right.
on my mother's side, I have relatives who came from immigrated here from Europe, and I've been looking at it, and there was probably, there might have been some name change or something that occurred. That happened a lot to people people who had like long names. Basically, their names were changed on them. And a lot of people lost their history, lost their heritage.
Right. Right. Exactly. They've completely lost their surname.
Yeah, lost their surname. There's people who are African. There's people who classify themselves as being African American, which is a little funny to me because the word African comes from the Roman general Africanus, and American comes from America Vespucci. So when you say you're African American, both those words come from a white man. So it's kind of funny, you know what I mean? That's always
Right.
been fun. That's always been funny to me. People say I'm African American, but both the names come from white European people. Which doesn't matter if you know it, which really isn't a big deal. Just know your history, right? But
Right.
a lot of people will think that there's a lot of black people in America who think they're actually from Africa, and they're not from Africa. There's people in America who are black. They never came from Africa. Some of them did. There's black people who were here the whole time before the settlers came. There's black people who who are from the islands, from Indonesia. There's black people who are from other places of the world besides Africa. And they
Right.
got here, they came here different ways. Most black people there's a lot of black people who did not immigrate, who did not come over on slave ships. And that's one of the things about Ancestry.com and the DNA trace that I think is fascinating, is people are finding out, what their roots are, what their heritage really is.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it can help you tell. It can help you tell a different story.
Right.
It was like the hidden part of the story, especially if what you're saying is a lot of people, because of what we're taught in America about like the slave trade, and then there was the Civil War, and then this happened, and then there was Jim Crow, and this is like the movement, and you might have a lot of people saying, well, I know that I must have come here, it must have been that my ancestors came here from Africa, which
Yeah.
probably a lot did, but there could be a whole other migration that we don't know about that nobody talks about.
Right. Because I'll be sitting there. I'm an educator, and so I'll listen to college students who even have PhDs, and they'll be saying, I'm black, and I'll say, so you're a color? You're a color?
Mhm.
What color in the are you black? Are you green? Are you blue? Are you a light-skinned orange person? What color are you? And I have relatives. I'm black. My father's black. I have relatives who say the same thing to me. I have to sit down and explain to them how life really works. I say, you're not a color. You're not a color. If you didn't immigrate here, what country is called black? What country is called white? You didn't
Right.
immigrate here from the crayon box. What country did you come from? You didn't immigrate
Right.
here from a crayon box. Black didn't become popular until James Brown came out with that. James Brown came out with, what's my name? I'm black and I'm proud. That James Brown made that popular. But I say, you didn't immigrate here from a crayon box. What country did you come from? You have to have a national identity and national origins. If an Irish Terrier ends up dead, what country did the Irish Terrier immigrate? Ireland. A British Bulldog. The UK. Even dogs have nationality. Okay?
Right.
And so you got to realistically break it down. Africa was named after a Roman general. So we're at a place where people don't even know where they're coming from anymore. People are
Yeah.
talking about they're coming from crayon boxes now.
Right. Right. It's totally what's covering up is it's covering up the economics and the migration patterns of colonialism. I would think. Especially when we had like the spice trade. I have a feeling a lot of migration took place because of that. But all that we get taught is sort of the British American narrative about it.
Right.
There was this
Right.
big, concentrated, traumatic thing going on, and this is all that anybody needs to know. And they're not talking about the patterns of migration that were resulting as a result of their economics, basically.
Right.
That's something really fascinating. Yeah, I'll have to read up on some of that too. Um,
Right. Right.
it'd be really interesting.
Yeah. Because there were looking back, when we go back and we look at I was looking at some pictures of black people that were living in Europe wearing night suits and stuff. Have you ever seen that stuff?
No, they're wearing like armor and stuff.
Yeah, it was some black people living in Europe wearing night suits back in the Middle Ages. And of course this gets back. If you look at the Catholic, the Christian churches in Spain, notice how they all have the architecture of a mosque. All the churches in Spain, all the old churches in Spain, they look like Muslim mosques.
Mhm.
They were built in the fashion of a Muslim mosque. Why is that?
That's really interesting that you bring that up, and I think we might have a way to find out because I just saw an article the other day talking about how the influence of the development of the Spanish language actually shows influences of Arabic and Persian. So there is some type of connection there between those two countries culturally, and that you can find it. The historical trail is like in the language.
Right. In etymology in the language, tracing the root words.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Have you ever read a book? There's a book called Native Son.
No, I haven't read that book.
There's a book called Native Son. It came out in 1940 by Richard Wright, who is as a quote unquote African American, right? But it's about in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, basically. A rich white family had hired him to basically do errands for them. He was like their errand boy, and they were good to him too. They were real nice to him. They gave him a good job. And all of his friends were hoodlums, but he wanted to live a straight life. And they have a daughter that was blind, and there was something wrong with the daughter. She was blind or deaf or maybe blind, and I can't really remember. but something happened to her, and the people, the house he was working for, they were like communists or something like that. Like his friends, the younger white people that are around him, around this house, they were communists or whatever. And it's been a while since I read the book, but he actually killed the girl. He wanted the girl. The girl was making a bunch of noise, and he went up there to get her to be quiet. And he was scared that he was in. Then he was in her room, and they heard him. They heard somebody in her room, so they were going to come check on her with all the yelling. So he got scared and killed her because he didn't want to get in trouble for being in her room. But he wasn't in her room to hurt her. He was trying to get her to be quiet. Then he ended up chopping the girl up and burning her in a fire. And then everybody found out that he killed her. And so now it turns into the black guy raped the girl and killed her type of thing. You know what I mean? The book is interesting, man. It's an interesting book. But the writer of the book, the writer of Native Son, he was writing books about the Moors and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Way before that, he was writing all sorts of books back in that era. So the history of black people in America and stuff, that's been something, you know, a lot of people come on the internet now and talk about it, but that's like an old subject. Actually, people were talking about that, you know, back in the early 1900s.
Right. Huh. Yeah, I've got to read that. That sounds, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't read it in a while, Native Son. It was a pretty good book, you know. It was a good book. And, you know, I mean, you could just go on and on and on, like those old Olmec statues down in Latin America that look like black people. You know, it's like, where did those come from?
Right.
You know, those are like 20,000 years old. Where the hell did those come from? So, you know, I guess it's open for debate. You know, the whole thing about who we are, who are white people, I mean, you're definitely not going to learn about it in high school.
No, you've got to have these discussions and go search. Because while we're talking, I typed into Google, I said Black Moors, because I knew there were the Black Moors, and I knew I'd heard about it, and there's a whole thing about the Moorish civilization that says when blacks ruled Spain.
Yeah, that's the book. He wrote a book. The guy that wrote Native Son, he wrote a book about pagan Europe or something like that, about blacks living, and you know, I mean, you got to think, you know, that's the oldest standing treaty in this country, the United States of America, is with the Ottoman Empire. It's a treaty with the Moors. I mean, a lot of people, you know, these guys come online all the time, people who are part of the Moorish side, so they come online all the time, and they talk about this stuff. Some people take them seriously, some people don't. But they have a lot of merit. They're talking about world history. These guys aren't just making this stuff up. I mean, there's real documentation, historical documentation. It's not a silly subject, because most people from the mainstream hear these guys talking, they think this stuff's silly. It's not. There's something to it. Like the Negro Black Codes of back in the 1700s, they had the Negro Black Codes, and there were people saying, "I'm not Negro," and they were saying there were black people that were saying, "Hey, I'm not a Negro.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Moor," and they would win their suit in court. And so it's interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Oh, that is very interesting, man, actually, because while we're looking at it, this goes back into what we were just saying about the Muslim or Arabic influence on the language, because it says 1492, interesting enough, isn't that when Columbus sailed the ocean blue? Is that the rhyme? Europe is freed. Boabdil, the black Muslim general and ruler of Granada City, is defeated after a besiegement of 8 months by the Christian armies. So we're going to the Crusades here. Consequently, the last Moorish bastion falls, and some 3.5 million blacks living in Spain and Portugal fall back to Africa or disperse throughout Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that something?
That's amazing.
Then you got that Chinese sailor who there was a Chinese sailor who was a Muslim. He was a Chinese explorer, and he was in East Africa. And his purpose for being there was the animal trade.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's paintings in China of giraffes. There's ancient paintings in China and artistic expressions of giraffes. And how the hell did giraffes get in Hong Kong or China or whatnot? Well, they were buying them from Africa.
Right.
Just like in Rome, when you see the lions fighting people and the lions eating people, where do they get the lions from? They got them from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So wherever you see African animals, you know there was people that were doing business or had something going with that continent. And they've been finding, yeah, they've been finding birds from China and South America, and all sorts of creatures from all over the, from Africa and different sorts of places. But this Chinese explorer, they intermarried too. In China today, there's black Chinese people that came from that ancient explorer explorations. He was bringing black women back to China and whatnot, and he was a Muslim too.
Mhm.
He ended up becoming a Muslim.
It's like historical forensics. The more that you dig into it, the more that even things today are starting to make sense, because you just kind of see step by step how one thing led to the other.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Definitely. And it goes back, it goes back to the education that we've been getting is wrong about who we are. Because you got to think about it. These universities on the East Coast were there before the country was even really founded. They're saying that the country was founded as in the United States of America, 1776. I mean, you got colleges on the East Coast that have been there since what, like the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s? Like Harvard's older than the country, isn't it? Let me see how old is it. Harvard, like Yale and Harvard, older than
yeah,
the
look
country?
it up. Look it up, man, because I don't remember.
Oh, we should be voting for the president of Harvard. We should be voting for the presidents of the college. They've been here longer than the country.
Right.
I just love listening to Harvard. Are you familiar with law?
Wait, familiar with you just called it law?
Yeah. Harvard was established in 16. This should stimulate. This should be some conversation brings stimulation. This should stimulate the neurons in people's brains if they got some. Harvard was established in 1636. And why do they got Hebrew? They got Yiddish. They use Yiddish, Hebrew, Israelite writing. They were established in 1636. Their motto in English is truth. Isn't that amazing?
That is pretty interesting.
I'm looking at the Harvard Corporation. Is its first charge of the Harvard Corporation here since 1636.
The Harvard Corporation, exactly. Do you realize? I mean, that goes into that whole thing about admiralty law. There was religious law and admiralty law, right?
Maritime admiralty law.
Yeah, and everybody's arguing about it, pretty much. And some of that has been, as at least when we're told, for revolutions or separating from certain countries, in some sense, was to get out from under their ways of defining the laws. I mean, that's why you would write your own constitution in the first place, is to change how the law is going to work. But it's almost like all this stuff has been done based on principles that were developed while these mass migrations and sort of colonial escapades and crusades were happening. Because the victor always kind of defines the law, we have to say, pretty much. But you see these sort of mutations of it. And I feel like in America, we were taking that and we were rewriting it for our purposes and saying, no, we're not going to follow this exactly this way because we do want to be separate from Britain. But, when you look at what we did, there's still evidence of our connection to them in the sense of the conquest that they had been on. So all of these conquests with these different people, sort of law had already been established, which I guess was what was important about this country, is that we took all of that and we said, probably just by sheer force, we just said, no, we're separating ourselves and we're creating our own version of this. And so most Americans, they get, I don't want to say brainwashed, but we grow up learning about the bicameral system, and learning about the way that we do, not common or admiralty law, but we would say, I don't know what the word is for like the law that they say is not that. Because how there's those people that they'll go and they'll have they get caught drunk driving or they did something and they're like, well, you can't prosecute me because under admiralty law, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, maritime admiralty law.
Right, but it's like, just how some regular citizens usually can't use that. But if you're making a really sophisticated legal case about something, you might be able to.
Yeah, I've
But
done it.
it
I've
gets
used it before. Like you can reserve your right to not be held by any unrevealed contracts. 1-207.4, I believe, and you can sign your signature with that under Uniform Commercial Code. I used to take classes on Uniform Commercial Code. Some
so
people
that
know it
actually
well
that
enough.
actually works. It worked for
Yeah,
you. It actually worked. For you?
if you know what you're doing, I wouldn't go into a courtroom and attempt to use it unless I really believed I had a good handle on it, because they'll try to get you in even more trouble because they might, but they know what you're talking about though. A judge is going to know what you're talking about. You're talking about common law.
Okay.
And see, a lot of people don't realize the law was set up on pirate law because, again, these were maritime colleges, like Harvard and all these colleges. Originally, they were maritime colleges. Like the University of the State of Michigan was set up to be a farming college. People went to the University of Michigan to study farming because Michigan has a lot of farms. So these were colleges set up like the original pirates were experts on maritime law. They could pick a lot of pirates as being old drunks and stuff, like the Johnny Depp from the island, the Caribbean island, and all that stuff. But in reality, these guys were experts on law and math. They were, they could read the stars, navigate their way. Pirates had to be really smart, and so these were pirate colleges, and so that's what the law is based off of, pirate law. And
that's amazing. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. And so based off the country is based off of pirate law, basically. And that's why all these maritime colleges at the East Coast, they were educating people to go out and run the world,
And didn't that seem like part of the problem? Like the way they've got us trained, we've got our perception of the law, but it's like they're still living in the 1600s. They're like, we've still got our secret pirate law, but you have to be in the know. You got to be one of us, either elite or very educated, to play at our level. So most people, Jameel, like you said, you got to use the UCC. That's because you were educated. Most people would just be like, I have no idea. I'm letting my lawyer do everything. They would have no idea it was an option for them.
Yeah, well, they don't even know when you step in. First of all, when you go into a courtroom, if you're supposed to ask for permission. If you go into a courtroom and you put your hand on the gate and you pass the bar, you're supposed to ask for permission to be in there. First of all. Second of all, the flag. This gets in. The flag has the gold fringe. That stands for Maritime Admiralty Law, the law of the water. That's a military flag. So that's not the original flag of the Republic. It's a complex subject. I'm not an expert on it. There's a lot of people on the internet speaking on this subject. I would never give anybody legal advice. I would never tell anybody to try any of this. That's your life. Do what you want with your life in whatever court you got to go to. I ain't got nothing to do with that. But I'm familiar with the subject, though.
Right.
So
no, it's like it'd be a whole separate show. I mean, this is something that you can get a lot of people to weigh on this. It'd be really interesting.
Yeah, they don't like people. They really don't like people talking about it on the internet. And so it's not a subject I'm familiar enough to speak with to an audience or listeners. I'm just familiar. It's a subject I'm familiar with a little bit, but I'm no expert on it. I know enough for me, and that's good enough for me. But the country, the country at whole has so much history. Like when you look at now, are you familiar with lawyers? Like you remember like F. Lee Bailey? Those old.
Hang on a second. So you said F. Lee Bailey?
Yeah, F. Lee Bailey.
It's like I know I've heard the name, I know the story, but it's like I'm old, so I've got to refresh my memory real quick. Okay.
Yeah, that's not. And going back, I just want to leave a side on that. That's really ancient Phoenician stuff. Talking about pirates and the water and stuff. That goes back to the ancient Phoenicians. And they used to paint their ships in all black at night so nobody could see them coming. And they were maritime traders. They would travel all over the world buying and selling. in doing business.
Okay. What's the connection to F. Lee Bailey?
F. Lee Bailey. Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought he was I thought he was a really cool lawyer. He was like a '60s lawyer.
Oh, wait a minute. He was the guy in the O.J. Simpson case. One of.
Yeah, F. Lee Bailey took the Simpson case, which was like I
Okay.
think that's been one of the biggest trials in recent years. The Simpson case, and
Yeah.
F. Lee Bailey was he had the Simpson had the dream team. F. Lee Bailey, Johnny Cochran, and all that stuff. That was a dream team right there, boy. They could have beat any case.
Did you look at his the summary of what Wikipedia says are his notable cases? Because he
He did
did
the Patty
like,
Hearst case.
yeah, the Patty Hearst, the Boston Strangler,
Oh,
Korean
he
Airlines
represented
flight.
Richard DeSalvo. As a
Um,
Boston Straight, he represented Richard DeSalvo. I didn't know that.
yeah, so the Boston Strangler as well as the Korean Airlines flight 007. Um, and some stuff that I've never heard of that says the Coscott Interplanetary, and then it says Paul is dead.
Mm.
Um, George Egerly, Ernest Medina, Patty Hearst, Claude DeBach, Carl Coppolino. That's some strange. It's a strange mix, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I like listening. You know, if I might have time, I like sitting back and listening to guys like him talk because he has, he has like his own theories on law and what law is and what law isn't. And if you can train your mind to think like a lawyer, you can really get a lot of advice out of those kinds of guys. Not just about law, just in any area of life. Learning law or learning math or learning science, it can help you in any area of your life.
Right.
You know, that's the fun thing about learning is you don't have to be a doctor to study medicine. You don't have to be you don't have to be a prosecutor or an attorney or a judge to study law. You can just study it just because you enjoy studying it, and the benefits are tremendous.
Totally. You know what? In fact, before we talked, I was thinking about our subjects, and I was at first, like I told you, like I like to meditate in my own way sometimes, or I'll just find something I like to look at to sort of slow my thoughts down. I was looking at my little piece of amethyst, and then I started thinking about math, and I can remember as a kid, like struggling sometimes because I would want to play with the numbers and just make stuff up,
Mhm.
and that would get me in trouble because I confused myself. But I was sitting here and I was starting to think about, what if input was connected to output, and what that leads to is that function that is connected to computer science, where you've got like you take a number, you square it, right, and then you take the result and you put that back in as your next input. So like 2, 4, 16, 256, etc. Basically, you input one into the other, that you get the range equals the domain, because everything is
Right.
really just a factor of 2. And if you look at it on a graph, what they did in engineering is they let that, I believe, represent an analog signal. Um, but I wouldn't have thought about that or done it if I wasn't just sitting here playing. But I let myself sit here and play with it, and then I used Google to educate myself on what it was that I was putting out on this piece of paper, and go, okay, this is something that, as a child at some point I probably was taught, and for some reason today it's finally actually making sense to me, even though it probably didn't when I would have taken a test on it, But
Mhm.
to want to be curious, and to play with things, can think leads us into the discoveries that we're having. I mean, it seems like everything we're talking about, we just end up sharing resources in different books and different websites, and it's all about everybody filling in the big picture for each other, because everybody holds some knowledge. You know what I mean? Everybody's knowledge is important, and the more that we
Right.
share
Right.
what we know, it's like we're all teachers for each other.
Right, right, definitely. Like Bruce Lee said, all knowledge is self-knowledge, and Bruce Lee also said, knowing is not enough, we must do. And,
Right.
I believe that's absolutely true. All knowledge is self-knowledge, and knowing is not enough. We must exercise this knowledge in some area of our life, at whatever capacity we can. You know,
Yeah.
and I'm a high school dropout. There's a lot of people out there who have far more knowledge than I do. Compared to the people, you're a very knowledgeable person, but compared to a lot of people I research, I'm sure you can agree you're a researcher too. There's a lot of people I listen to talk. I don't have near what I should have as far as knowledge. There's a lot of
Mhm.
knowledge I want. I'm going to get it too.
Right.
I like reading
Right.
books. And so like me, I like reading. I go back and get old textbooks from the 40s and 50s and stuff like that. And the educational system now, there's a lot of information there that's available right now, but there's a lot of information that's missing. There's a lot of words that's missing from our vocabulary that we're using. The newspapers are printed at what, a third grade reading level?
Right. It's getting worse
And so,
too. Yeah,
yeah, it's getting worse.
technology.
The newspapers are printed at a third grade reading level.
They are,
You
and
know,
they're hiring people who can't spell or who don't edit because I did it. My mom just told me the other day. I was talking to her about this, and she was like, "It's happening everywhere, even in the books that I read." She said that she's had books where the person is trying to talk about, let's say, plural, like a group of women were standing on the corner, and instead of saying that, they'll say a group of women, and it's like they don't know that women is the plural of woman, and they'll just write it that way and leave it like that. And I
right.
see them doing that stuff and not spelling things and being ungrammatical, and I'm just like, it even for me to get back into reading too, because for a while the internet was really great, but the more you're into it, the more you're like, I can't concentrate on this. This is too long. It's on a screen. Maybe I need glasses, but it's like to read some things that are really in depth. I mean, I just won't even do that anymore on the internet, and I feel like what's really important is to start
You,
using it as a.
right.
Sorry, what?
I don't even know what's going on anymore in this country because I don't know what's going on. Something's going on because I had took a tour of the governor's mansion one time in Mississippi in Jackson, and I really enjoyed it. It was beautiful. The tour people were beautiful. The workers down, that's a really beautiful state. They got beautiful workers. The police are extremely friendly. I remember talking to a cop for like 45 minutes. He was so nice and friendly, and I really loved it down there. I got into a conversation with somebody. They were like supposed to be an expert on the Civil War. I'm sitting there talking to them, and we go from how Professor Thaddeus Lowe started the aeronautic team for Lincoln during the Civil War. Jefferson Davis and the Confederacy had their aeronautics team, the air balloon team, during the Civil War, and for the purpose of pictorial intelligence, which I thought was fascinating. But then we get into another conversation about Lincoln and the Secret Service, and these people didn't realize who the guy who started the Secret Service, Lafayette C. Baker, started the Secret Service during the Civil War. And I'm like, you're supposed to be a historian. You don't even know the background to the Secret Service. You don't know about the aeronautic stuff. The history books, the history books are failing us. Barnes and the history books that come through Barnes and Nobles are good. I go to Barnes and Nobles, but people got to get back and see what these people, the authors and writers that were around during the Civil War. People need to be listening to them.
Mhm.
And I know what you're talking about. It's a national disgrace, is what it is.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm just sitting here amazed too because what you just told me, I'm like, we all think, well, nobody was doing anything aeronautical engineering back then. But then we treat the development of the airplane. Frank, the first guy who did it, and for some, I'm sorry, I'm having a brain blip. I can't remember his name, but it that had just come out of nowhere spontaneously. I think would be the point. But
Right.
it's treated like it is.
Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Wow, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. Yeah, it's treated like it is. Wonderfully said, wonderfully put. I, and it's harder. It's harder. One of the things I've been starting to notice, it's harder to find real bookstores.
Right.
It's harder to find real bookstores. You remember the traditional old mom and pop bookstores?
Oh yeah, man, I used to love I mean, I even love some of the big ones like Borders, but when I was living in Austin, we had a lot of indie bookstores that were just run like mom and pop shops, and they would order the stuff for you that was not mainstream, or sometimes they just have it for you, you know, and that's been taken away, and it's almost like now you have to know what you're looking for to find it, and then if you're going to go on Amazon, you've got to know what you're looking for, to type it
Right.
in, whereas yeah, you could just explore. You could explore when it was physical. You could just go through the stacks and go, "That's a
Yeah.
weird title. I'm gonna pull that off."
Yeah. So I was dating some girl, and she had a car, and she came and picked me up, and she said, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "I want to go to the bookstore." And she said, "Well, I don't know where any bookstores are." She said, "I'll look at my phone." She said, "There's Barnes and Nobles," and she said, "That's it. I don't know." I'm like, "Well, I'm like, wow, that's crazy. You don't know where any bookstores are? You know where the library is? And that's where we're at. People
Yeah,
just want to go out. People just want to go out and get drunk, and that's that. People don't even know where the bookstore is anymore.
right, exactly.
They got to Google it if it exists.
And I
But
think they replaced googling with, in a way they short circuited things and tried to replace googling with reading or googling with knowledge, because there is that moment where something is urgent and you just want a fast answer, right? But
mm,
then they took it to where maybe if you're lazy or just not feeling good, and you can't get to the library, you could Google something and get the information without going there. But what happened over time, that's how it was for me as a student. But over time, it got to where the other input of still going to the bookstore and getting ideas by stuff I'd seen started to get taken away. So you had no outside stimulus telling you to search for something. You only had your own thought of, oh, I need to search for this.
mm. Yeah, yeah. No outside stimulus. You just had your own thought to search for it. Yeah. Have you ever seen how? Have you ever seen how? If you start looking stuff up online, there'll be advertisements that pop up right next to it over and over
Oh yeah,
again.
that all the time. Yeah.
Right. Right. That's the craziest thing I've ever seen. That's why, like, I like going on the internet and I like using Google to look for stuff because it's very easy. But then when I got an old American edition of Family Encyclopedia. I'll be reading it, and I'll get more information out of an old encyclopedia sometimes than what I can Google. Because even with
Mhm.
the dictionaries, I use 1828 Webster's dictionary instead of the regular Google dictionary. Because the Webster's 1828 dictionary will give you a far more in-depth definition than Google ever would.
Right.
Then you got to sit there and explain to the people if you look for a word on Google, you got to tell the people in there what it means. There was a word, Rotarian, which means universal, and Googled. I was looking for the definition, and one of the little dictionary things that came up on Google, they didn't have the definition for it, but Rotarian was a well-used word at one time, and they didn't have it, and I had to sit there in the comment section and explain to the people what I was talking about.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I just use the 1828 dictionary. You get more information out of it.
That's really interesting. I'm going to explore that. Because as an English major, I'm big into words, so I'd love to look at the 1828
Yeah.
version. Yeah, especially because Rotarian. I mean, to me, there's like the associations that are built over time too. Because I might think to myself, well, that must be a person who speaks at the Rotary Club, right? It was like might be what I'd tell myself if I didn't know the definition.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to think to yourself, well, why is that? Like why is it that some other aspect of society is the thing that's most closely associated as being the definition, of that word that you would first try to create for yourself,
Right.
versus just
Right.
going and knowing what it actually means. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. I was learning a tremendous amount of information from Kabbalah research. Kabbalah research. I was studying Jewish mysticism, and
Mhm.
Jewish people, the Jewish people that research and provide Kabbalah for, especially for Gentiles. God, the words and terms they use. I mean, I've come across words I've never even seen before.
Right.
You know, and I'll sit there and research. Are you familiar with Kabbalah?
You know, I know about it, but I actually have never sat down and tried to read it, and I think that's probably because I just didn't want to. Probably just avoided it for some reason.
Yeah, Kabbalah is the bomb, man. And I go back to the ghetto a lot. Like, I'm mixed. I'm half black and I'm half white. My father had a lot of children. There's a lot of neighborhoods that are terrible neighborhoods where there's crack dealers and gun crime and stuff. And I know all these people. And I'm not a sellout. I'm not the kind of guy who you grew up with me, but I don't want to be around you because I think I know more than you or because I don't like you. We're still cool. I'm still coming around. And so
Right.
I go back into the hood, and I sit there and I explain to people this stuff. I'll sit there in the project and talk to people about Kabbalah for 2 hours. I'm in the hood. I'm in the hood explaining interstellar dust and astrophysics and all kinds of stuff. And you learn a lot by teaching people. If people don't know what you're talking about and they start asking questions, you're going to learn a lot. As a teacher, you learn more than as a student. That's one of the things I've learned in the last couple of years. As a teacher, you learn more than as a student.
Right.
I had a book all about the secrets of Islam, and I was teaching. And a lot of black people, a lot of my relatives, a lot of black people I grew up with, they love that stuff. I was sitting there teaching about the secrets of the pyramids and all that stuff, and Islam and stuff. And people will be listening. People will be sitting there bobbing their head, playing the music, bobbing their head, playing the music. Then they hear you talk a little bit. And I'll be like, the Sphinx was actually a dog. And they'll say, "What did you say?" I'll be like, "The Sphinx is actually a dog." Then they'll start getting out of their cars and start listening to me talk. And they'll be sitting there smoking their little weed joints and all that stuff. And I'll be sitting there rapping to them, talking to them, explaining to them what all this ancient stuff is. Before you know it, they'll be like, "Man, let me get your number, man." They'll be like, "You got a website? What's your Facebook?" People want to know. People want to know what's going on. And I've learned more teaching people.
That makes a lot of sense too. I mean, because like you asked me about F. Lee Bailey, it's like I know I used to have my own definition of what he was about, but the minute you asked me, I was like, why am I thinking of John F. Kennedy? I have no idea why he would be connected. And then when I look at this Wikipedia page, it says, in the alternate history novel, Surrounded by Enemies, what if Kennedy survived Dallas? Bailey replaces William Kunstler as Lee Harvey Oswald's defense attorney. I don't know why I knew anything about that or why it started to replace my other ideas of what I knew about him, but that's almost kind of like the Mandela effect thing, where it's like people's memories are getting deteriorated because they're not reading enough. They're not keeping up on the history that underlies what's happening in the present.
Right.
It's very easy to get misled,
Yeah. Well, and if you sit there and you watch television, it's really just entertainment. Even for the people who don't read books or read newspapers, when they watch the television, I think the television is just there for entertainment, like the news and all that stuff. Because I was watching the news one time, and they had a guy on there, and he was like dancing. It was the Weather Channel, and he was like dancing around on the Weather Channel, making jokes and stuff. And I thought I was watching a music video. I'm not joking. I was sitting there watching the Weather Channel, and they had some guy dancing around with all these dancing around like some sort of clown on national television. I thought I was watching a music video. I turn, I like watching older shows like have you ever seen that show? Remember that guy, the big guy who used to dance, Rerun?
Yeah, Rerun. Was on
Yeah.
What's Happening?
Yeah, What's Happening with Roger and Dee and all that.
Yeah.
Wasn't Dee the mother in Friday?
Oh, I don't know.
I always thought Dee was the mother on Friday. But you used to have to watch comedies to see people dance around like clowns. Rerun. I loved Rerun. Rerun was cool. But he, big guy jumping around dancing. He used to do the robot and break dance and all that stuff. I thought that was really fun to watch Rerun. I used to watch reruns of Rerun years ago.
Right.
And then you don't even got to watch Rerun anymore. Now you can just watch. You can turn on any mainstream channel. You can just turn on the news or the Weather Channel and see people jumping around like that.
Right. It's pretty.
Isn't that crazy? Everything. There's too much There's too much entertainment.
Right. Right. Everything's got to be slick.
Everything. Yeah. There's too much. People are too over entertained. I think. Because I remember I was growing up. It seemed like everybody talked about what was on television, and nobody really talked about what they thought. And you can see, and people talk about what they saw on a television set, and they don't talk about what they think. I stopped watching TV one time I stopped using phones, televisions, computers one time for like 3 months, and I was so scared I started watching TV again.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I stopped using electronics for 3 months, and I started looking at people, and I was looking at somebody's house, and I was walking down the street, and I was looking at, there's some guy, you can see the television lighting up in his living room, and he was sitting there in his house watching television, and I thought that looked so strange. If you went back in time and took some people from like 300 years ago and brought them here, they wouldn't want to stay here.
Right.
That
would freak them out. That totally freak them out.
People walk down the streets talking through technology that they hold in their hand all day, and they watch basketballs bounce around on electronical projection systems and stuff, and they don't really, they can't read that good, and they work on computers. They lost their job and they work out of, it wouldn't really make sense.
No, it would be. Just even the idea that first of all, the type of energy can be harnessed, to do what it's doing. I think it would freak people out, and then to see, the sort of remote communications, I think would also freak them out. Even though back then they probably would have said, they might have felt like they had a dream of, we wish this could be faster and more instantaneous. I think if they saw how it was being done, they kind of might pause for a little bit.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. It's a trip. It really is a trip. It kind of makes me think of those wild, those native indigenous people that live deep in the jungle. You got to think, why would they want to come out?
Right.
If I lived in the jungle, I don't think I would want to come out for this.
No, and most of them don't. You hear the stories about how somebody might go down to South America and contact an isolated tribe, and sometimes it goes okay and sometimes it doesn't. But the one thing that you get is people have been there for years, and they've survived for years that way, and they can continue to survive for years that way.
Right. Yeah.
Well, hey, man, do you want to, do we got more subjects, or do we want to kind of call it for this one, just for now? And kind of
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't answer back real quick. Somebody was yelling my name from across the way. I had to peek and see what the heck was going on. But yeah, we're definitely gonna have to come back and do some more. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into the reading that you gave me, and I'll probably text you or hit you back and ask you some more information so I can become more familiar with it, and I'll do some readings on that woman, the Addis Black.
Henrietta, yeah. I'm as soon as we're done, I'm gonna send that to you, and I'm gonna go eat. And if you've got like more in-depth questions, I might be able to help with some of the what I know as far as like the different cells they're looking at, and also possibly how some of this connects to the genetic engineering they're trying to do with CRISPR. They're trying to get a what's the word I'm looking for? A model. They're trying to look at this as a model, and see if they can take, what she's got in a sense and genetically engineer it or reverse engineer it, as a basis for studying things like cancer. I'm going to have to also kind of go into some more of her background too, because there's some stuff here I haven't seen before. But we should definitely talk about this because I think it might be really, really interesting what we come up with.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to encourage the listeners to donate, and perhaps me and you can split the buck, and we can get some new books, and we can come back and educate further. I'm in a position to where I've spent years educating people, and all sorts of obstacles and challenges have come my way, and I get all sorts of praises all the time. People leave comments saying, thanks, Jameel. I really look forward to hearing your stuff again, and people send me emails thanking me, and I just poured my heart out over just like you have too. You've done the same thing, but I poured my heart out over the years, and if people, hey man, if you got $5 on a debit card or something, me and Josh can split it 250, get some books, you have a heart, you got $100, $200, $1,000, whatever, it's all going to be used to further education. Anyway.
And and if you guys have got any ideas about pieces that you know of and books that we should read, definitely drop a comment and say, check this book out. Because if nothing less, most stuff you can get from your library, and if they don't have it, you can ask them to order it for you. And if you've got, cool librarians, most of the time they're going to do that. So don't ever feel too like money has to be an obstacle, because you can always just use your county resources, because that's your right to go in there and request that they order those books for you.
Right. That's your right. And we have all sorts of expenses that creep up on us. Like I was sitting around today, and somebody wanted me to help them, educate them, and type some paperwork up on one of my subjects. I didn't have any money for the paper, and so and Josh, you've been so helpful over time with me, and we just want to leave people with that incentive. If you got a few bucks, throw it in the pot. Don't take your $12 and go down to the movie theater and spend it watching that riffraff. Donate money to education. Donate money to education. Go throw your money away at some bar somewhere. So that we can get some books with it to help people.
Yeah, a little bit goes a long way. I mean,
right.
$5 is not that much when you think about it. So, well, hey, this has been great. Do you want to just let me? I'll send you the information. I'll send you that article. Then I'm gonna run out and get some food, and when you're done reading it, if you've got any thoughts you want to share tonight, or if you need to process, that's cool too. But yeah.
Oh yeah. We'll be around. I'll be around. We can talk later, and hopefully, maybe somebody will, want to donate or something, and hang out with us or something. Who knows? But I'll call you. I'll hit you up later on, and then you'll give me the name of the book, and then I'll get into it, and then we'll talk about, next time we come back, I'll be up on the subject, and we'll really be able to put some work in.
Okay, that sounds awesome. It was fun talking to you.
Okay, Josh, thank you so much. I know all the listeners, thank you, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thank you too. Have a great night.
You too.
Bye.